Okay, before we go to Apple Park, a few cool things I've learned that weren't in the keynote. So one, when you're doing that lock screen thing that cuts out the images, those don't have to be portrait mode or anything. You can use any image with a clear subject. Now, as long as you have a newer iPhone, you can use Face ID in landscape mode. Family photo sharing does not compress your images at all. I was a little worried about that, especially in like a production environment. Taptic feedback is now available for the keyboard, and there's live captions in FaceTime so you can read what the person's saying in real time as they say it. Okay, let's go to WWDC. It's WWDC, my very first and my first time at Apple Park, so I'm very excited today. This was Apple's first big in-person event in a very long time, so we were all really curious what it was going to look like, how it was going to work, and they really opened up Apple Park for us, which was amazing to see. So the Steve Jobs Theater is usually where events are, that's kind of built for press. But in this case, they opened up Cafe Max, which is just part of the Apple Park campus, and filled it with chairs and put a huge, extremely bright Jumbotron at the end of it so we could all watch the same live stream together. At the beginning, Tim Cook came out, said his good mornings, and then we watched the same live stream that you guys did.
We're here to connect with you and exchange ideas in a way that can only be done in person.
And the best part is for sure that I got a t-shirt. Often, WWDC is thought of as like a software first event, but we did see some really exciting hardware this year, so let's not bury the lead. Starting with the M2 MacBook Air and 13-inch MacBook Pro. Since Apple switched to their own custom processors, we've all been wondering, what is the release schedule going to look like? And I guess now we have a rough idea because it was a year and a half since November 2020 when the M1 was announced, and now we have an M2. And it's also 3 months since the M1 Ultra. So now we're in an interesting situation because that newest M2 processor is in the entry-level Mac, but the M1 Pro and the M1 Max and the M1 Ultra are all still out there. But they are all still faster. So if you just bought one recently or you're considering getting one of the professional MacBook Pros, one of the higher end, bigger specs, they are still a lot more powerful. The M2 on its own isn't going to outperform it, but it holds its own pretty well. Apple tells us there's an 18% improvement in multi-threaded performance. And that's the kind of jump that you would love to see year over year and not exactly what we were seeing in the Intel days. And the way that they've combined their performance and efficiency cores has led to some amazing results. If you've seen any of my tests lately, those efficiency cores are starting to look like other manufacturers' performance cores. Like they're efficient, but they are doing incredible things. And you probably noticed this is a completely redesigned MacBook Air. And I can tell you in person, the design looks fantastic. They've got a few new colors, and I think Midnight is the one we're all talking about. It's the one that makes me want to start using a MacBook Air just to get that color. It looks so good in person in certain light. It's a bit blue, and a lot of light, you can mistake it for black. I love what they've done with it. I kind of want a phone in that color. There's still a little part of me that wishes they'd gone for the really bright colors of the 24-inch iMacs, but there's always next year. You can push that performance further now with up to 24 gigs of RAM, and the GPU can go from 8 cores up to 10. But keep in mind that $1199 starting price they mentioned is not including those updates, so you'll have to pay more to get it that far. But they did keep the M1 MacBook Air in the line, so if you want to get in for $999, there is still an option available for you. There's a little detail here that I think is slipping through the cracks and not enough people are talking about, and it's really exciting, especially for video editors. So that media engine that we've seen on the M1 Pro and the M1 Max, that is now in the M2, a different version of it, but it still massively accelerates your video editing workflow. That's the part of the chip that has opened up whole new workflows for me over the last year. Being able to do stuff on my laptop where I used to need to generate proxies or I couldn't edit footage from my R5, I can just do anything with my M1 Max. So I love this media acceleration, and it means that there's less pressure put on the CPU and GPU. And I actually got to see a demo in the hands-on area here of 8K footage running on a 4K timeline in DaVinci Resolve with a lot of different grades on it. It had LUTs and adjustments, and it was playing back perfectly smooth, no hiccups, not pre-rendered, in real time. So this means a MacBook Air could be a serious production machine. Of course, don't get me wrong, I'll still be using a MacBook Pro because I want the most I can have at any moment, but there's a lot of people that use a bigger computer like the Mac Studio at home or in their office, and now on the go, you could have something really compact that's extremely capable. Apple told us about the new speaker system, which is much improved over the previous Air, and it's hard to communicate this stuff over the internet, so I'll just describe what I was able to hear in a quiet room. They now have spatial audio, And that actually works pretty well. There is separation on that tiny little machine between left and right. It feels like stereo, especially watching at a normal distance for a laptop. If you're just like a foot or two away, you can hear the separation of spatial audio. That's really impressive. But the downside, there's still really no bass. This thing is so small that the woofers inside, well, I don't think there are any. It's pretty quiet. It's not going to sound like the bigger MacBook Pros, but the spatial audio thing, I think there's something to it. I was surprised to see the M2 because we also haven't seen the Mac Pro yet, which is one of the things I was kind of hoping to see here. So now the big question is that going to be M1 or M2 based? Are they going to have an M2 Ultra soon? This new world of Apple-based silicon is just really hard to predict. They also announced an M2 13-inch MacBook Pro, and I don't really know who I'd recommend this to. It's the older design, and so you're missing out on some great features like MagSafe. And you don't get the SD card reader of the new MacBook Pros. So basically, this would just have a fan to do more workloads than the MacBook Air. But I think the MacBook Air makes a lot more sense for most people. And as these more affordable Macs become more and more capable, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that affects buying decisions. Like, you don't have to get something middle of the line or top of the line to do certain workflows where you had to spend way more money before. You can go to the entry level and probably still get your basic work done. Because the trade-offs at this point compared to those big MacBook Airs is going to be performance of, like really intensive photo and video editing. And then also some of the nice to haves like an SD card reader and the XDR extremely bright, amazing screens of the MacBook Pro. But they did make some improvements to the screen. It's now 25% brighter. It's 500 nits and bigger because of smaller bezels. So it's 13.6 inches. Were you disappointed not to see a new Mac Pro today?
A little bit. The supply of the Mac Studio is still in very high demand and the wait times are long, so that's a computer that I would love to switch to. It's just a matter of the storage and the custom configurations. Yeah, I guess we're gonna have to wait and see.
Talk to you on the podcast soon.
Yeah, for sure.
Since this is the developer conference, there's of course software announcements, and I always enjoy these because it's kind of like a free upgrade to whatever computer or phone you're already using. So I'm just going to go through the ones that I expect I'll actually use. There is a ton of stuff out there, but here are the things that I found the most interesting. I'll start with the iPad because it's going to be quick. I don't think it got enough attention that there's now reference mode, meaning production people like me, video editors, photo editors that are using their iPad as a second monitor, which is an amazing new way to use it and actually really useful in travel situations like I'm in right now. Now you can target that iPad with calibrated color settings. I don't know the details of how this works, but it is prioritizing accuracy. What I hope is that I could actually use a professional calibration tool on that iPad so that I know that I can trust it when it's sitting next to my MacBook Pro. But whatever the case, I'm really glad to hear Apple is doing things specifically for professionals using their sidecar technology. It also supports display scaling. Not sure how that's going to work yet, but everything they've been doing so far has been really great for creators. The one other iPad thing that might end up getting me to use it a lot more for work is a new app called Freeform. Now, Apple's not the first one to do this sort of like brainstorming, whiteboarding, collaboration app that seems like it can kind of do everything all at once. But having it integrated into the Apple ecosystem is something I'm probably going to use. You can basically have a FaceTime call with someone else and be writing on a whiteboard and be putting documents in there and just easily be sharing kind of anything. We'll see how it is to use, but watching the demo, it clicked for me right away. The new lock screen is what everybody's talking about. It's kind of the headline feature, so I'm not going to spend that long on it. But the one interesting thing I learned is that it's using that same cutout technology that you can just send any image as like a isolated PNG, basically. And that's what it's doing to create the special effect on the lock screen. So you don't need to use portrait mode or any special bokeh photography or whatever. Any photo that has a clear subject can be cut out so you can get that parallax effect with the time going behind your subject. Something that'll have a real impact for me is moving notifications to the bottom of the screen. I've been saying for years that's where I want everything that I interact with to be, and you'll notice in my What's on My iPhone videos, I'm always finding ways to push things down, including all my apps. I'll put spacers at the top, so the apps that I use the most are in the bottom row. Dictation has been completely overhauled, which I use a lot. I'm actually kind of a slow finger typer, so I'm always happy to just talk into my phone. And now they've encouraged that a lot more. Apple's kind of like facilitating it so you don't have to feel like you're jumping in a whole other interface. You can still access the keyboard. And they're also using that technology for real-time captions in FaceTime. iPhonedo has already done a cool demo of this. It's not completely accurate, but it is good enough to like get a conversation across, especially if somebody is hard of hearing. I hope it can do translations. I'm not sure of all the features here yet, but I want to try it as soon as possible. Something that's been a long time coming, I'm really glad to see, is shared iCloud photo libraries. So especially within families, there's all sorts of automatic ways that you can just have your photos go out to the people that are around you if you say that they're in your family. And you can control it so that it's not completely automatic. You know who's going to receive the images, but it's syncing them at full quality too. So for my wife and I, we're often in like production environments. We're actually shooting stuff on our phones that the other person needs. And at the end of the day, we need to airdrop a bunch of stuff. So having this move automatically with, like I say, full quality images that we can edit with afterwards is incredibly powerful. And maybe one of my favorite features announced was being able to use your iPhone as a webcam. So this was already possible with third-party apps like Camo, but this feature has now been fully Sherlocked. Apple has brought it into their ecosystem, and it makes it really easy, actually. You don't need to launch any external app. As long as you're in a video chat already, you turn your phone horizontally, and if it detects that it's not moving, so either it's on a tripod or some kind of mount on your monitor, it'll just become your camera. And a few details I learned that really show how much thought went into this is you can select which camera on the phone is being used. So if you use the ultra wide, then you're going to have center stage where the camera follows you around through the scene, or you can choose to have the wide angle for the sharpest possible image. Probably the one feature in iOS that's got the most hype from this announcement is that in iMessage, you can now either undo sending or edit a text. And you basically have 15 minutes after you've sent it to make a little change or delete it entirely. The recipient is notified of what you've done, so you can't sneak anything by them. But for people like me that make a lot of typos, this is fantastic, and now we just want to see Twitter do it. It felt really exciting to go to Apple Park and just be a small part of this keynote because I've been watching them my whole life. So it was really cool just to see how it all happens, get a small peek behind the curtain. I'll be reviewing the Air as soon as I can, but if you're trying to decide which Mac to buy, I've got a whole playlist reviewing all the most recent ones, especially testing them out for any photographers or filmmakers out there. See you in the next video, guys.